In this day and age, action blockbusters are appearing more and more every few months. Companies are constantly at war, trying to outdo the other in order to stand out from the rest. But ironically, they end up doing the same exact thing. The current state of action movies are stale. But what do you think of when you hear the term action film? The Mission Impossible movies break the mold and go above and beyond every time. But for every new Mission Impossible movie, there's another bland generic film. So what makes a great action movie? How do you stand out from the rest? Well, let's take a closer look at the genre of action to answer this question. More recently, I've been watching a lot of action movies, and there are two gems that really struck a chord with me. Chris Hemsworth's Extraction and Jake Gyllenhaal's The Covenant. They made me realize how generic a lot of these newer action movies are. Alright, yeah, I know there's a lot of good action in these movies. More specifically, I'm going to focus on the John Wick movies as a representative of all the action blockbusters, because that's arguably the best out of the bunch, even though they started to decline in the quality of the story in order to go bigger and better. I made a full video on this, go check it out. Then there's Extraction, a very simplistic story, and yet, yeah, I'd watch this over John Wick or the other blockbusters any day. The Covenant was also more enjoyable than the Wick movies, and there's a lot less hand-to-hand combat. So why? Why did I prefer these films over a more popular and beloved franchise? For starters, let's get one thing out of the way. Each of these films are all beautifully choreographed with amazing action, with their directors bringing in a unique and stylistic way of cinematography and combat. Both John Wick and Extraction were directed by former stunt coordinators, who displayed their knowledge on the big screen in order to make some of the most iconic fight scenes in cinematic history. When it comes to action, all three movies deliver big time. Extraction is all about relentless, brutal action with a standout single-take sequence that's a testament to the craft and skill involved. On the other hand, John Wick is stylish and kinetic, with slick choreography and a focus on hand-to-hand combat. The Covenant is more of a race against time, with a high-stakes plot and intense sequences. So the action for me isn't the problem. It's ironically the opposite of the problem, unless you're the Marvel movies. It's the narrative that bothers me most when watching action movies. You can have big explosions and intense combat and fast-paced driving sequences, but the real stakes of the movie are only as powerful as the story. It's also their characters that set them apart. In terms of plot, all three franchises share a common theme: a badass protagonist on a mission. However, their motivations are what sets them apart. John Wick is a man filled with revenge in honor of his wife. On paper, it's a really good and a classic action hero trope. A man who is so enraged after the death of his wife. But the films never flesh out their relationship, so you stop caring after so many movies and aren't able to relate to this once grounded hero anymore by the fourth film. Now, while it may seem that Extraction and The Covenant are generic military movies, they're much more than that because of their characters. They are men who are filled with guilt. In Extraction, Tyler Rake is a mercenary who is driven by a deep sense of guilt. He wasn't there for his son when he died because he decided to go off and serve in the military of his own volition. He found it easier to abandon his son than watch him die, which led to this empty hole in his heart and a death wish to fight. So when the mission to protect this boy he's assigned to extract suddenly goes wrong, causing everyone to want to leave the kid behind to die, he feels the need to push himself further and put it all on the line. It's as if he's trying to atone for his past mistakes to make up for the time he didn't spend with his son. This guilt adds a layer of emotional depth to the relentless action, making the Extraction films not just about the missions, but also about Rake's journey of redemption. In The Covenant, after John Kinley is gravely injured in battle, he is dragged across the Afghanistan desert by his translator Ahmed, hiding him from the Taliban, sacrificing water for him, and taking care of him, all in an attempt to save his life and get him back home. When John Kinley wakes up in a hospital in California, next to his wife and children, he is filled with immense guilt, knowing that he lives comfortably while the man who saved his life is hiding from the Taliban after agreeing, promising that the US would give Ahmed and his family freedom in America. He is strongly called to do something about the situation, going back and trying to save Ahmed before it's too late. And that's the arc we see in the movie, a dramatic, high-stakes, intense emotional arc for both you and the protagonist in the race against the clock. In these two films, you learn more about the protagonist on a deeper level, their flaws, their strengths, their weaknesses, their personality, and what drives them to push further. All because the movie simply took time for you to resonate and understand the character. The guilt pushes these characters into action, shaping their narratives and giving depth to the high-octane action sequences. These motivations make the characters relatable and their stories engaging, showing us that beneath the action and violence, there's a human story of loss and desperation. Guilt is a powerful emotion that resonates with all of us. We've all made mistakes, we've all had regrets, and we've all wished we could turn back time and make things right. That's what makes Tyler Rake's journey so compelling. He's not just a mercenary on a mission, he's a man seeking redemption, a man trying to make amends for his past. That's what makes John Kinley's journey so compelling. He's not just a soldier, he's a man who knows the high value of a family and the tragedy of losing them. A man who must honor the covenant he's made to a fellow brother in arms. This emotional layer of complexity to the action makes these two films more than just mindless shoot-em-ups. And I'm not saying that revenge or vengeance is not strong enough to make a character compelling. Although John Wick does it wrong, there are movies that do it right, like Denzel Washington's The Equalizer. Even Robert McCall, the protagonist, has a bit of a mysterious background, like John Wick. The story is extremely personal, that you're invested in him and the stakes. He's compelled to avenge those who cannot fight for themselves and fight injustice after his wife was a victim to these crimes. And thus, the vigilante is born. I like when the action is justified in the context of the film and not when it's forced in there for the sake of convenience and flashing colors. And don't even get me started on the state of the Marvel movies and their recent action heroes. I think that when big blockbuster movies have such a huge budget, they lose focus on the complexity of their main characters because they want to play it safe and focus more on the intensity of the combat, which audiences will likely remember more of, therefore becoming more and more generic. My example is the conversation around John Wick 4, which is mainly about the overhead one-er shot. Even Extraction 2 falls into this trap. And to be fair, I didn't enjoy this one as much as the first, except for that 20-minute one-er sequence. Don't get me wrong, the John Wick, Mission Impossible, Fast and Furious, and Marvel movies all undoubtedly have great iconic action sequences and are upheld for a reason, with each having their unique flavors of both narrative and somewhat compelling motivations. When you watch these films, you go in and basically turn off your brain, which I think is good every now and then. You should be able to just enjoy what you're watching. But after seeing so many oversaturated, grand, high-scaled action movies, it's become harder and harder to do that now. I also think that's why Bullet Train and Everything Everywhere All at Once are so upheld, because they balance the line between an interesting, compelling main character and creative, exciting sequences in a world where that doesn't happen often. So while films like Mission Impossible and John Wick have intense action that make their characters badass, it's films like Extraction and The Covenant that have the character's journey make the action badass. And that's what truly makes a great action movie.